a young man struggled to put together a plausible defense to the allegations against him in the death of his young love. He told investigators repeatedly that he didn't know what happened, that when he'd gone to bed she was alive, but when he awoke he found her dead, unresponsive and cold. This is a summary of The Invisible Guest, a movie Timothy Irvin recommended on social media in January of this year. Perhaps it felt familiar to Irvin, a Marine who struggled to explain the suspicious death of his 19-year-old wife. In 2015, Irvin told investigators on Okinawa that he awoke to find his wife unresponsive and cold. He said he loved her. He said he missed her. He also said he held his hand over her mouth until she went limp. This is Conduct Unbecoming. I'm Erin, and I'm your host. Today's case has a lot of moving parts, and I've done my best to take all the information available and pull it together into chronological order. I'll link directly to my resources in the show notes, with the exception of Timothy Irvin's social media. Timothy Irvin graduated from Hattiesburg High School in Mississippi in 2013. Hattiesburg High is the only local high school in the district and serves an annual average of 950 students. Hattiesburg seems like a relatively small town. On the front page of their town website, the second link listed is for registering golf carts. During high school, Timothy Irvin seemed to have a fairly normal go of things. He was on the track team and still holds the third place record for the 1600 at his high school with a time of 5 minutes, 5 seconds. But under the surface, something more sinister simmered. The first indications of this was when he attempted to choke the girl he dated between 2011 and 2013. Unfortunately, I was not able to find more information on this incident. 5 months after he graduated from high school, Timothy Irvin left for boot camp. By February 2014, Timothy Irvin was a Marine. He married Glennis Shermaine Payton, also known as Nessie, on September 6, 2014. Timothy Irvin traveled ahead and arrived in sunny Okinawa on September 9, 2014. Because they were only married for 3 days prior to his travel, his orders wouldn't have been amended in time for Nessie to come with him on the outbound trip. In September, it would have still been warm, sitting at an average high of 85 and an average low of 75. The local typhoon or hurricane season was still going strong. Okinawa is under hurricane watch for the beginning of June through the end of November. Because of how remote Okinawa is, there isn't hope of evacuating when a Category 5 hurricane or typhoon is on the way, so the buildings are constructed with cinder blocks and have a lot of steel support beams. They're designed for withstanding brutal weather, not for aesthetics. If you're thinking of beautiful tiled roofs and ornate pagodas when you think of Japan, you are absolutely thinking of the mainland. I do wonder if people fed the Irvins the same line about Okinawa being the Hawaii of Japan, if this felt like embarking on a 3-year honeymoon in the subtropics. Okinawa certainly has its charm, and we made wonderful memories when we were there, but Okinawa is not Hawaii. I'm not going to refer to Timothy Irvin by his rank in today's case, because it changed kind of frequently. I suspect it would likely get confusing. Irvin was assigned to 3rd Marine Logistics Group, commonly referred to as 3rd MLG, which is under the umbrella of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force, commonly referred to as 3MEF. Within months of arriving on Okinawa, Irvin promoted to Lance Corporal. Sometime between September 2014 and March 2015, Nessie made the trip out to join Timothy Irvin so they could start their lives together. This was his first duty station and their first home together as a married couple. Before she could travel, they had to enroll her in DEERS, the Defense Enrollment Eligibility Reporting System, amend his orders, and she needed to pass a comprehensive overseas medical screening. As part of the whole moving to a small subtropical island without the most comprehensive medical care process, you have to get all your shots updated, have a clean physical and pap smear, and talk with Navy medical personnel about any existing health conditions. They're looking for any health concerns or conditions that hospitals in Okinawa cannot provide adequate care for. If a service member's spouse doesn't pass the overseas health screening, it doesn't mean the service member can't go to Okinawa. It just means they have to go alone. Sometime in July or August 2015, Nessie visited a website geared towards victims of domestic violence. A page that contained the phrase, "My husband hit me for the first time." In the evening of August 30th, 2015, Nessie's phone was used to search for, quote, "If somebody's body locks up and they ain't moving, what does that mean, not breathing?" Shortly thereafter, somebody searched for symptoms of death. Early in the morning on August 31st, 2015, Irvin notified emergency medical services that he found his wife, 19-year-old Nessie, unresponsive and cold to the touch. This set off alarm bells for the responding medical personnel. Nessie was young, she'd just passed the comprehensive physical, and there was no immediate apparent cause of death. Within hours of her death, Timothy Irvin took to social media to solicit prayers, writing, "Everybody pray for me and my family, my wife just died, Nessie Irvin." He followed this post up with a series of posts about the effect Nessie's death had on him. Nessie was taken to the U.S. Naval Hospital, Okinawa, on Camp Foster, where she was pronounced dead. Timothy Irvin was the named beneficiary for a $100,000 life insurance policy. He must have enrolled Nessie in the family service members' group life insurance policy and paid the premiums to keep her enrolled. The same life insurance policy that Caitlin Day, in episode 2, tried to murder her estranged husband over. The next night, September 1st, Timothy Irvin messaged his mistress and told her he loved her. That night, he exchanged flirtatious messages with other women, including an ex-girlfriend. Listen, I know grieving looks differently for everyone, and that few people are behaving rationally in the face of devastating grief. But this looks not so great. The autopsy was largely inconclusive, but did indicate that Nessie had been dead for some time. They couldn't get an exact time of death, and they couldn't give an exact cause of death. While she did have alcohol in her system when she died, it was consistent with normal alcohol consumption. She had no other drugs in her system. There were no clear signs of strangulation, overdose, or underlying health condition. Naval Criminal Investigative Services, NCIS, toured the site of Nessie's death, the apartment that the Irvins shared, and noted they found no signs of a struggle. Irvin met with NCIS the same day that he called emergency medical services. He told them that he and his wife had gone straight to sleep the night before. They'd gone to bed together. Irvin asserted that they didn't have any domestic violence issues. On September 3rd, 2015, Irvin was again interviewed by NCIS. He again asserted that he and his wife had gone to bed at the same time, and that he assumed she'd remained there and fallen asleep next to him. He added that nothing out of the ordinary happened on August 30th. From what I gather, Timothy Irvin returned to Hattiesburg about 2 weeks after Nessie's death, so she could be buried near her family. The Marine Corps authorized his travel and travel for a friend to accompany both him and Nessie's body back to Mississippi. This was, after all, an emotionally turbulent and fraught time. Nessie was buried on September 12, 2015. By September 19th, Irvin's attention turned to trying to find someone who does, quote, dope tattoos in the burg. While he was in Hattiesburg to bury his dead wife, Irvin also took the opportunity to go clubbing, driving out to the coast to attend a weekend-long birthday bash, including a stop at Club Illusion and a special appearance by Turnitia, a pole dance artist. Irvin returned to Japan on October 26, 2015. In December, 4 months after Nessie's death, Irvin promoted to corporal, the Marine Corps' E4. He quickly resumed playing on the football team he'd joined, the Kinzer Kings. This is essentially an intramural football team that played other military installations' football teams. In February 2016, Irvin was involved in a car wreck in Japan. It was taken to the Naval Hospital emergency room, the same emergency room that had pronounced his wife dead. Weeks later, the Marine Corps granted Timothy Irvin a humanitarian transfer and cut orders for him to transfer to the Naval Air Station in Meridian, Mississippi, to join Marine Aviation Training Support Squadron 1. Meridian is about an 80-minute drive from Hattiesburg, where Irvin and Nessie grew up. But just because you have orders doesn't mean that you immediately move. Before leaving the island in June 2016, Timothy Irvin received non-judicial punishment for a bevy of infractions. They included violating lawful general orders, making false official statement, and committing adultery with a married woman in Okinawa, the woman he messaged the day after Nessie's death, the woman he said he loved, too. Their relationship ran from 2014, the year he and Nessie married and moved to Okinawa, through 2016. It appears he was demoted to Lance Corporal as a result of this non-judicial punishment. A non-judicial punishment is punishment without the judicial system. You may have heard it referred to as Article 15, office hours, and captain's mast. Non-judicial punishment is usually reserved for minor offenses, like reporting late to duty, sleeping on watch, providing false information, or disobeying standing orders. To issue a non-judicial punishment, an NJP, the command first offers the Marine the opportunity to accept NJP. Service members can typically refuse NJP, but this can be risky because the command can then decide to take the offense to a court-martial, a full trial. At this court-martial, the authorized punishments increase significantly. At NJP, a Marine can receive a variety of punishments to include restriction, extra duties, forfeiture of pay, and up to 1 rank reduction. In July 2016, NCIS again interviewed Irvin. During this third interview, Irvin told NCIS that on the night Nessie died, he went to bed before her, sometime between 11:30 p.m. and midnight. They'd been sitting on the couch, he claimed, and Nessie stayed out there and wished him a good night. I want to point out that this is where Irvin's stories start to become inconsistent. That is, it isn't actually possible that Nessie and Irvin went straight to bed together, and that Irvin went to bed before his wife. Those are two statements that directly contradict each other. After that July interview with NCIS, Timothy Irvin began the long trek home to Hattiesburg, Mississippi. On July 28, 2016, Timothy Irvin landed in Mississippi and began a month of leave. He checked into the unit on Meridian on August 29th. A year after Nessie's death, on September 1, 2016, Irvin took to social media and asserted that for 7 months after he returned to Okinawa, he was drunk. When I read this, I thought about his interviews with NCIS, whether his colleagues were ever in danger because of his drinking, and that car wreck he was involved in. There's no way for me to resolve the questions this revelation raised, but I wanted to include it because I think it demonstrates the lack of filter Timothy Irvin had when it came to using his social media. On September 22, 2016, NCIS again met with Irvin for an interview. During this fourth interview, Irvin told NCIS that he went to bed alone between 9 and 10:30 p.m., while Nessie remained on the couch watching TV. On September 30th, 2016, which, for context, is 8 days after he last met with NCIS, 13 months after Nessie died, and 9 weeks after he returned to the United States, Timothy Irvin strangled his new girlfriend in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He placed his hands around her throat and squeezed. She was 22 weeks pregnant. The force of his hands around her throat made it difficult for her to breathe, and she later vomited. Strangulation is often called the last warning shot in domestic violence, and some jurisdictions, like California, make it possible for prosecutors to charge strangulation as attempted murder. But his assault on his girlfriend wasn't limited to strangulation during this incident. Timothy Irvin also punched his pregnant girlfriend at least twice and pushed her around. After falling, she began experiencing cramping in her abdomen and was soon hospitalized out of concern for her baby's health. She later explained that this violent outburst was all her fault, because she'd confronted Irvin over his infidelity. There's something I want to make abundantly clear. This assault was not her fault. Timothy Irvin's infidelity was not her fault. Timothy Irvin very clearly had a problem remaining faithful to the women in his life. Timothy Irvin very clearly had a problem becoming violent with women who expected more of him. This relationship ended, and Irvin began dating another woman within the next month, in October 2016. This relationship ended, and Irvin began dating another woman within the next few weeks, in October 2016. Shortly after they began dating, Irvin took her driving around the back roads around Hattiesburg at night. She recorded a video of him shooting 3 times into the air out of the car window. He later texted and asked her to send the video of him shooting his gun. This girlfriend reported later that he was physically violent towards her as well. At some point in late 2016, Timothy Irvin received a prescription for oxycodone for leg pain. For the sake of my belief in the medical system, I'm going to tell myself that they tried ibuprofen before jumping to opioids. I really hope I'm right. In February 2017, the Marine Corps offered, and Timothy Irvin accepted, non-judicial punishment based on his strangulation assault on his pregnant girlfriend, and for being absent without leave. Sources suggest that he was again reduced in rank from Lance Corporal, or E3, to Private First Class, or E2. On April 11, 2017, Irvin met with NCIS once more. This time, he submitted to a polygraph test. Timothy Irvin told NCIS during this polygraph test that on August 30th, 2015, the night Nessie died, Irvin became frustrated with her. He said he placed his hands over her mouth until she went limp and passed out. Research suggests it could take 40 seconds of suffocation for someone to pass out, but death by suffocation takes minutes. Timothy Irvin's account of what happened that night changed quite a bit. What actually happened? Were his later stories closer to the truth? Was there domestic violence? After she went limp and passed out under the weight of his hand over her mouth, did he leave her on the couch in front of the TV and go to bed alone? Did rigor mortis set in while he somehow fell asleep in the next room? When he awoke early in the morning and found she was not in bed, perhaps it was then that he searched for what it means when somebody's body locks up, what it means when they're not breathing, what the symptoms of death were. But at that point she was unresponsive. She was cold. She couldn't be revived. She'd been dead for some time. It was only then that he summoned emergency services, at the point when nothing could be done. Following this admission, Timothy Irvin was immediately placed in pretrial confinement. His Apple Watch and iPhone were secured by his command, Marine Aviation Training Support Squadron 1 in Meridian. But Rule for Courts Martial 707 requires the government to bring the accused to trial within 120 days of being placed in pretrial confinement. Due to concerns about meeting that 120-day clock, Irvin was released 2 months later in June 2017. NCIS requested a command-authorized search and seizure for Irvin's Apple Watch and iPhone. Specifically, the agent requesting authorization sought photos, texts, and emails that were evidence of making false statements, murder, and aggravated assault. NCIS hoped to find evidence of marital issues and the identity of additional witnesses. And given the searches found on Nessie's phone, they thought perhaps Irvin's phone held additional evidence. Irvin's commander found probable cause and granted the command-authorized search and seizure. There wasn't any evidence of false statements, murder, or assault on the phone, but agents did discover the video of Irvin shooting into the air from a car window. In September 2017, the Marine Corps brought charges against Timothy Irvin for murdering Nessie, assaulting his pregnant girlfriend in Mississippi, and making false official statements. These charges would go to a general court-martial. With the move to North Carolina for his looming trial, Timothy Irvin announced that he likely wouldn't try to re-enlist when he became eligible. He had 4 months left in the Marine Corps, and according to his social media posts, he figured it might be time to hang up his camis. As though he had any say in the matter after his conduct, and, the murder charges. In late November and early December, Timothy Irvin took some of the oxycodone he'd been prescribed a year earlier. He later made it clear. He wasn't taking the oxycodone because of leg pain. He was taking the oxycodone to get high. While it was a drug he was prescribed, it's misuse to take it for something other than the prescribed purpose or beyond the prescribed period. Irvin failed a urinalysis test in December 2017, and he was again placed in pretrial confinement. He was released a week later and placed on pretrial restrictions. On December 27, 2017, Irvin's commanding officer issued a 2-page set of restriction orders. These orders included regular check-ins and mandated that Irvin wear the uniform of the day at all times except while sleeping. In January, an additional charge of wrongful use of oxycodone was preferred and referred with the other pending charges to general court-martial. In February 2018, in the weeks following the preferral and referral of charges, Timothy Irvin broke his pretrial restrictions and went absent without authority, also known as being absent without leave or going AWOL. Basically, no one signed this man's permission slip to leave. His command then requested that the installation law enforcement issue a deserter warrant. A deserter warrant is a federal warrant that's entered into the National Crime Information Center database so that law enforcement nationwide can access it. The idea is that any law enforcement that encountered Timothy Irvin would see his warrant, detain him, and bring him back to his command. Timothy Irvin was located and was again placed back in pretrial confinement. A week later, in April 2018, he was released from pretrial confinement and again went absent without authority. Officials located Timothy Irvin. This time he was at his girlfriend's home. Law enforcement officials found him lying on the floor with bloodshot eyes, a bloody nose, and a suicide note nearby. His girlfriend divulged that he'd taken a bunch of pills earlier in the day, and that she'd stopped him from attempting to hang himself with a belt. Timothy Irvin was taken to a U.S. Naval hospital, and his doctors ordered a drug test to evaluate him for overdose. The drug test came back positive for cocaine, which his girlfriend remembered being in the house, but had never seen him using it. Irvin was, again, placed in pretrial confinement. In May 2018, the Marine Corps preferred additional charges for the cocaine use and the unauthorized absences, and referred them to special court-martial. It was too late to add these charges to the general court-martial. After charges are referred, or when the convening authority orders that the charges be tried, the only way to add additional charges is with the consent of the accused, which is unlikely and apparently didn't happen here. A special court-martial is an intermediate trial level. It's above a summary court-martial, but below a general court-martial. The panel or jury is smaller, and most special courts-martial involve either a military judge alone or a military judge with a 4-member panel. The maximum confinement that can be adjudged is 12 months, and the worst discharge that a service member can receive at special court-martial is a bad conduct discharge. This means that a dishonorable discharge is off the table. At his special court-martial, Timothy Irvin pled not guilty. Nevertheless, in February 2019, Timothy Irvin was convicted at this special court-martial of unauthorized absence, willfully disobeying a superior commissioned officer, failing to obey lawful orders, wrongful use of cocaine, breaking restrictions, and a wrongful discharge of a firearm under such circumstances as to endanger a human life. They got him for shooting out that car window. He was sentenced to a reduction to E1, confinement for 12 months, and a bad conduct discharge, the maximum confinement allowable, and the worst discharge possible at a special court-martial. In May 2019, Timothy Irvin's general court-martial began. He pled guilty to the September 2016 aggravated assault of his pregnant girlfriend and to his wrongful use of oxycodone. He pled not guilty to murdering Nessie and to 5 specifications of making false official statements during the NCIS investigation. From my perspective, this was masterful defense work. By pleading guilty to the aggravated assault of his pregnant girlfriend and the wrongful use of oxycodone, those were no longer contested, and evidence of them didn't automatically come in at trial. The panel wouldn't necessarily hear about Nessie's death and the strangulation of his girlfriend during the trial. Something I also want to touch on is the fact that in the law, it's a big deal to relocate a trial to a new venue, to have a jury that's from a different area. I think a lot about the humanitarian transfer that Irvin received, and the panel of Marines in North Carolina, the panel of Marines that weren't in Okinawa and maybe didn't understand what it's like to be on the rock, the realities of the day-to-day. I wonder what they thought happened to Nessie Irvin when they found Timothy Irvin not guilty of murder and making false official statements. And I wonder what it was that created reasonable doubt, whether it was even a close call for this panel. Yes, Irvin admitted to placing his hand over her mouth until she went limp, but the autopsy never identified a cause of death. At sentencing for the crimes Irvin pled to, the panel heard for the first time about this guilty plea to assaulting his pregnant girlfriend, about the severity of the assault, about the oxycodone use, about the prior non-judicial punishments for unauthorized absences, about the adultery in Okinawa, about the special court-martial for cocaine use and desertion. The government argued that Irvin should not receive less than 24 months of confinement, while the defense asked them to limit themselves to 12 months because he'd had a difficult childhood and he'd accepted responsibility for the things he'd pled guilty to. My read on all of this is that during sentencing, and after hearing all of the facts and additional testimony, the panel had some big F feelings about the decisions they made about Timothy Irvin and his guilt. They deliberated for 1 hour, and guys, that's only enough to watch one episode of Below Deck for context. And they sentenced Timothy Irvin to 4 years confinement, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, reduction to E1, and a dishonorable discharge. They sentenced Irvin to double what the prosecutors were asking for. Timothy Irvin is no longer in prison and, by all social media appearances, has regular access to the child his girlfriend was pregnant with when he strangled her. He refers to this child as his. He posts often about his military service, reposting throwbacks to his preparation for boot camp and highlighting when he joined the Marine Corps and moved to Japan. This in spite of being dishonorably discharged. His social media currently has a pinned post that states, "Y'all wanted me to be the bad guy, so bad, only played yourself. Haters gonna hate, you don't know my story." No one wanted Timothy Irvin to be the bad guy, but that doesn't make him a good one. Timothy Irvin, you get no thank yous for your service. Today's safety brief is for the Marine Corps, and it seems that Timothy Irvin could have benefited from this canned safety brief. Don't add to the population, don't subtract from the population, stay out of the hospital, the newspaper, and jail. He, unfortunately, went 5 for 5. Legal Beagles, it's to our benefit that this trial happened in the United States. We didn't have to FedEx any blood samples for FAVN results or quarantine for 6 months. There were 2 appeals, one for the special court-martial and one for the general court-martial. The result of the special court-martial appeal was essentially no change, so I'm going to focus on the general court-martial appeal. The general court-martial, as a refresher, is where he pled guilty to strangling his pregnant girlfriend and wrongful oxycodone use and was sentenced to 4 years confinement. I hypothesized that there were some bigger background feelings that influenced the panel's sentencing, and on appeal, Irvin's legal team argued that 4 years confinement was inappropriately severe for what he was actually convicted of. Whether a sentence is appropriate depends on 4 factors. First, the nature and circumstances of the offense and the history and characteristics of the accused. Second, the impact of the offense on any victim of the offense. Third, the need for the sentence to provide just punishment, deter misconduct, protect others from the accused in the future, and rehabilitate the accused. And finally, fourth, the sentence is available under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Of note, the punishment must be sufficient but not greater than necessary to promote justice and maintain good order and discipline. The Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals opinion evaluated all of these factors, and it honestly reads like a laundry list of reasons that the 4-year sentence was appropriate. They noted that in the 3-year period leading up to his general court-martial, Irvin received non-judicial punishment twice, suggesting that he was a Marine with little regard for the law or for the consequences of breaking it. Many of the offenses were committed while Irvin knew he was under investigation for, or while actively facing charges of murder. They noted that the physical abuse of his pregnant girlfriend, including strangling her, was serious. They even observed that the oxycodone prescription abuse wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a repeat in the pattern of misbehavior and drug use. But the NMCCA concluded that the sentence handed down by the members was, quote, not fully in accord with the requirement that the punishment be sufficient but not greater than necessary to promote justice and to maintain good order and discipline in the armed forces. They found that 4 years confinement was greater than necessary and determined that a sentence of 36 months confinement was the appropriate amount to assure that justice was done. The way I'm squaring this in my head is that the government asked for 24 months confinement, and the panel came back with 48 months confinement when they had a more complete backstory, and may have been influenced by everything else they'd heard in the trial. NMCCA split the difference and decided on 36 months. To be frank, I'm not confident that another 12 months of confinement was going to teach Timothy Irvin anything substantive, or prove to be rehabilitative to someone who, by all outward appearances, still doesn't believe he's done anything wrong. If you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to share, subscribe, and rate it wherever you listen to podcasts. I invite you to submit case suggestions and feedback to conductunbecomingpod@gmail.com. Join me next time when we fly over to North Carolina and finally discuss some unbecoming conduct. Until then, take care.